New intro, who dis? It's supposedly fun. Welcome, my name is Greg. I'm here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and talk about any exciting bookish things that have gone on during the week. There are only a couple of bookish things to talk about before we get into the Friday Reads, where I will talk about the 3 books that I finished since the last time we spoke, and what I am also currently reading, and what I might read next. If you'd like to skip to that portion, you may do so with the timestamp that will be in the description box down below. As I said, just a couple of things I was going to cover first. The big book news that happened this week is that unfortunately we lost a queer legend. Edmund White passed away this year, or just this past week. And he is an author that I have been wanting to read for a very long time and have not gotten around to doing it. So this Pride Month, if you remember from my pile of possibilities that I made for myself, which will also be linked down below, I had said that my sort of minor theme, because it's not really that much of a theme or a goal that I'm using for the month of June, but I want to catch up to some classic queer authors that I have not read yet. And one of them was Edmund White. And the book that I had selected for that was A Boy's Own Story, which is the first installment of a semi-autobiographical trilogy that Edmund White wrote. It is considered a classic gay book. And I think the loss of Edmund White this week probably means that I should absolutely get to this. I'll talk about the hurdle I'm facing in terms of that when we get to the Friday Reads portion of the video, but this is very likely going to be something that I pick up in as a way of honoring Edmund White. And I had already put it on my pile of possibilities, and it was highlighted as one of those books that I kind of wanted to get to, so we'll talk more about it. But in honor of him, I have a couple of other Edmund White books that I just want to spotlight. I think the next Edmund White book that I would want to get to after reading A Boy's Own Story is his memoir, City Boy: My Life in New York During the 1960s and 1970s. Obviously, that is a very interesting period in gay life. There was a very powerful underground movement. If you've read the book Dancer from the Dance by Andrew Holleran, it covers some similar material, but a memoir would be a really interesting way of doing that. So this is probably the one that I would end up doing next. I found a signed first American edition of Edmund White's Skinned Alive. I think it was actually at my library. So I feel very lucky, especially now, to have this in my library. And it's very dear to me. A friend, Erica from The Broken Spine, sent me this beautiful edition of Nocturnes for the King of Naples, which I believe was Edmund White's first book. If not his first book, it is very close. It says it was published in 1978 before the trilogy of frankly autobiographical, I can't talk today, novels that made him famous. And yeah, it doesn't say if it's his first, but I think it is. So there's that one. And then I don't have the third installment of the trilogy that begins with A Boy's Own Story, but I do have a copy of the second one, which is The Beautiful Room is Empty. So I figured I would read A Boy's Own Story, probably read City Boy, and then from there I might dive into The Beautiful Room is Empty and kind of decide if I want to go on to the third book from there. So, farewell to a legend who did a lot for gay literature, and I am hoping that this month I will manage to read his book at long last, because honestly it has been too long. The next thing I wanted to cover before we get into the Friday Reads portion of the video is a thank you. I was very surprised to get a letter from Montana Book Company yesterday, and when I opened it, I found this little gift card holder. And Stacy Payne sent me a gift card from Montana Book Company and the envelope just says Happy Pride Month. So Stacy, thank you. That is incredible. What a delightful surprise. I was not expecting that. And as it happens, we're going to Helena tomorrow, or the day that this video posts. So hopefully I'll be able to stop it. I immediately ordered a book that I have been wanting, and hopefully I'll find something else to get while we are there. So that was just a really delightful surprise. So Stacy, thank you. And the only other thing to talk about before we get to the Friday Reads is just something delightful that I found in my local used bookstore this week. And because it is a book I have already owned and have already read, I'm not going to include it in my book haul for the month of June. I just really couldn't pass up this edition of Tin Man by Sarah Winman. If you follow along, you know Tin Man was my favorite read from last year. I'll link the video with our favorite books from last year down below. And the paperback already has a really beautiful cover, but I hadn't seen this. And it has the same gilt wave motif. And I just love it. It's so gorgeous. And this actually is, I believe, the first American edition. It is the first US edition of this book. And because I loved it so much, I am so happy to have this edition of the book. Oh, I guess I should also talk a little bit about the intro before we get to the actual Friday Reads portion. So basically, it kind of happened spontaneously because I have been trying to rethink the way I post about books on Instagram. And if you would like, there will be a link to my Instagram down below. There always is in every video. So I've been trying to rethink how I post about them, and I sort of on the fly came up with an intro to a book review that I did, or actually book mail. I was talking about some book mail that I got. And I made that little book turning the page thing with the supposedly fun logo that was created for me by a graphic designer recently. And I was looking at it and just thought, that's really smart. And I thought about it, and, I have used the intro that I have had for a very long time. I can't remember when I made the one as it exists now, but it has been years. And I started thinking, maybe I could use an update, something a little bit fresh, because that was a picture of my bookshelf, like the very first bookshelf alphabetically. At the time I did it, a lot has changed on my shelves, so it actually doesn't even look like my bookshelf anymore. And I had talked to Joel, and we were thinking like, oh, well, you could just pick your favorite books or pick some Pulitzer books. And I was kind of resisting because it feels like over time, like, what if you do the Pulitzer books and that people get an idea of what the content is? And I don't know. So I just decided to do it here, and you'll see a new outro at the end of the video as well. So, new me. Anyway, let's move into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. I'm going to pull up my notes because the first two books that I read or finished over this past week are books that I don't have copies of or don't have copies of anymore, because the first book that I finished over this last week, I'm laughing because I talked about it in our May reading wrap-up, and I went on a rant about it. It's Murder by Cheesecake by Rachel Ekstrom Courage. I've gotten a lot of comments from people saying, oh, I was hesitating about reading a Golden Girls cozy mystery because it just sounded like it could be bad. And I knew it could be bad, but I chose to be optimistic. So I read it, and I really did not like it. I pretty aggressively didn't like it, in fact. And Joel pointed out to me, he said, you are not enjoying this book. You should just DNF it. And I was stubborn because I have not DNF'd anything in 2025 so far. I think when you get further into the year without DNFing, it feels harder to DNF something for the first time because you start to feel like, am I going to have a perfect record? And ultimately, at the end of the day, the perfect record doesn't matter. Enjoying what you're reading matters a bit more. And finishing this book really ultimately served no purpose. I did not like it. I will not spend a lot of time ranting about it here because I did a lot of that in our May wrap-up. That video will be linked down below as well if you did not see that. Suffice to say, I don't think Rachel Ekstrom Courage has the voice of the characters or the voice of the show. And if you're a fan of Golden Girls, it feels off from page one. So this is supposed to be the first in a series of cozy mysteries that are based on the Golden Girls. And if they were to change authors, and it seemed that this new author had a better handle on what the Golden Girls is and what it is that people continue to love about the show, I would possibly be convinced to go back into this world. But as it stands, if they continue with Rachel Ekstrom Courage, I am out. It's not going to happen. The premise of the book, if you are interested, is that Rose has a cousin who calls her aunt, just to make it a little confusing. And this cousin is getting married in St. Olaf, but there's a disaster. So somehow, in logic that doesn't really make sense, Rose decides that the best option is to move the wedding to Miami and host it there. But she has to have all of the traditional St. Olaf wedding ingredients to make sure that there's this whole complicated thing about why I don't have the energy to get into it. But she feels it's very important that all of these traditions be checked off of the list. And there's resistance from the groom's family because the St. Olaf wedding traditions are, of course, weird, but not in a fun way, just weird. And in the lead up to the wedding, a man is murdered. And they just kind of stumble on the body in the place where they're going to be holding the reception. And it turns out this is a man that Dorothy went on a half of a date with. And I'm already getting irritated talking about it, so we're just going to stop and leave it at that and say I did not enjoy this book. I angry binged it in order to finish it, and it was not worth it at all, in my opinion. That's harsh. If you had a different opinion of Murder by Cheesecake, I would be happy to hear it, so let me know in the comment section down below. So far, based on the reading wrap-up for May, it seems people kind of had the same experience that I did. I haven't heard anybody who said, I actually liked it. So if that's you, let me know in the comments. For now, let's just move on to the next book that I finished over the past week, which was I Will Greet the Sun Again by Kashayar J. Kabushani. I had been listening to this on audio, and I finished it on Monday or Tuesday. I don't remember which. This is an interesting case, and it kind of reminds me of what happened with The Missing Morning Star, which is fresh in my mind because we just did that May reading wrap up, and I talked about it in there. And I talked about it. It's like, I liked this book. I don't really remember details. And that's kind of the same thing here. I remember more details of I Will Greet the Sun Again, but I find I don't really have a lot to say about it, which probably says a lot. I think it's a good book. I don't think it's a great book. It kind of ends up in this limbo space in the middle where I don't feel enthusiastic about it, but I don't feel like I disliked it either. And that just comes across as like a poor recommendation. And I guess that kind of is what it is. A lot happens in the book. The premise of it is that you have three brothers who are growing up in the United States. Their family is Iranian, and there is tension between their father and their mother. The father kidnaps them one day and takes them back to Iran, where they have not really spent any time. So this is basically a foreign land to them. And they spend time there, and they get to know a bit of the culture where they come from. The protagonist, the brother that we are most following, is gay, and at an age where he is discovering that and discovering that he is different from his brothers and that he might not fit into his family. And then they end up back in the United States with their mother, and trigger warnings for sexual abuse, by the way, because that is in there as well. Ultimately, it just doesn't really feel that the book has much to say or offer, and that's probably why I can't really find anything to say about it. And I think if the topic sounds interesting to you, I would actually recommend a different book called Only This Beautiful Moment by Abdi Nazemian instead, because I think it covers a lot of similar ground, but has very poignant and resonant things to say. That was one of my favorite reads the year in which I read it. I can't remember. Was that I think it was 2 years ago. And I just love that book. And it's even about Iranian characters. And it involves characters who grew up in Iran, characters who grew up in the United States, and they sort of go back and forth over time. So I would say it's a much better version of this book. And again, that sounds harsh. I'm being harsh this week, I guess. But it'll get better, I promise. Yeah, so I feel like I'm in this sort of middle ground where I don't think it's a bad book, but I certainly can't give it like a full-throated recommendation because, again, I think there's a better version of this that you can seek out. And again, if you disagree with me, I would love to hear it in the comment section down below. Just let me know. that takes us to the final book that I managed to finish this past week. And that was one of the books that I really wanted to get off of my checklist this month, an author that I have been wanting to read for years, many years at this point, and that is Colm Tóibín, and I read The Blackwater Lightship. This is a beautiful book, a wonderful introduction to Colm Tóibín as a writer. I think, let me talk about the premise first, and then I'll talk a bit about how beautifully restrained and spare this book is. So the premise is true as it is described on the back of the book, but there's actually more to the story, and I am a bit flummoxed that part of the story isn't really mentioned, because it's one of the things that was the most resonant about the book to me. So the premise, as described on the back, is that you have Helen. Helen has a mother named Lily and a grandmother named Dora. Helen's brother Declan is dying of AIDS, and Helen, Lily, and Dora have to come together to care for him as he is very likely dying of complications from AIDS. And that is basically as the book is described, but there's actually more. So there's a lot of complicated family history. Lily struggles in her relationship with her mother, Dora, Dora being Helen's grandmother. Helen really struggles in her relationship with her mother, Lily, and has not spoken to her very much in her adult life. And Lily has not met Helen's husband. She has not met Helen's children. And there's a lot of tension in there. And even Declan has kind of gone off and done his own thing. He's more connected to the mother and the grandmother than Helen is. But this is a family who's very much living in their own little boxes. But the thing that nobody really talks about that I think is actually kind of important to this story is that they are not the entire care team for Declan. Basically, when they find out that Declan has been ill for a long time, Declan has friends who have been caring for him, specifically Larry and Paul, two gay men who are not his lover. They're not in a relationship with him. They're friends who have been doing the hard work of caring for him during his illness. And now Declan has decided that he's ready to tell his family about what is going on. And they all go to the grandmother's house near the town of Blackwater, where there is a lighthouse. And eventually the backstory about the Blackwater Lightship comes out. And I think that I can't tell you what it is because it would feel like a bit of a spoiler, but it's one of those really beautiful things in the book that is very subtle, and because of the subtlety feels even more resonant, because Colm Tóibín doesn't feel like he's sort of like tapping you on the shoulder like, hey, that's the title of the book. Do you get it? Do you get it? He's not doing that at all, and that makes it even better to me. So they all go to the grandmother's house on a cliff looking down at the ocean. They can get down to the beach, but the cliff is sort of decaying and crumbling into the ocean over time. And they are all in this house with Declan's two friends, Larry and Paul. And there is even tension there because, say Lily, the mother, wants to be in charge of taking care of her son, but she doesn't necessarily know what to do. Larry and Paul know what to do. They have been there for him where she hasn't. And, she didn't know. So there are kind of excuses there, but, they have the experience to care for him. When things go south, they are the ones who know what to do. And there's an interesting interplay about, gay people caring for other gay people in this time of crisis when many men were dying from complications of AIDS. And it adds this really beautiful layer to the story. And yeah, so the book takes place over the day when Helen finds out, and then it follows along as she informs her grandmother, informs her mother, as they bring Declan back to the house and Larry and Paul join them. And it covers a couple of days as they try to take care of him, try to have moments of comfort, have moments of despair, and kind of fight with each other and scrabble. This is a book with very thorny, prickly characters. The grandmother comes the closest to being a bit of a delight because she kind of enjoys the gay men in her house. And yet, all of the characters are kind of thorny and complicated, in ways unlikable, in other ways understandable. And I could easily see how someone reading this would feel like they can't abide the characters for how thorny and occasionally unlikable they are. Like, Helen doesn't necessarily have great reasons for not talking to her mother. It's just an old situation that has festered over time. And they are sort of broaching the topic of reunion. And that is particularly resonant for me at the moment because of things going on in my own family that I won't get into here. But part of me I feel like I have to let this book sit a little bit because I wanted to give it 5 stars. I did give it 5 stars on Storygraph at first, and then I thought I'd put it down to 4.5. Let it sit for a little bit, because that happens to me a lot. I'll finish a book and be really emotional and enthusiastic about it, and then in weeks after, I'll look back and think, oh, I should change the rating on that a little bit, just, to be fair. So I feel like I need to let my emotions about this book balance out before I really decide, but I had such a great time with this. I can see how someone would be a little frustrated with it, but I think the beauty of Colm Tóibín's writing and the restraint that he shows are really stunning. This is not a book that feels depressing and hopeless at all. And I really enjoyed that. So I need to give it a couple of days, maybe a week, to see where exactly I end up on this book, but I can tell you I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to read more of Colm Tóibín in the future. And I'm so glad that I finally got around to reading one of his books, and I look forward to many more in the future. So, on audio, after I finished I Will Greet the Sun Again, I had forgotten that I had gotten on a hold list for a book called Dog Years by Mark Doty. Mark Doty is a poet. I have actually read a book of his poetry called My Alexandria. And if you follow along, I kind of struggle with poetry. My Alexandria is a book of poetry that I really enjoyed. So when I heard about the subject of this book, part of me was extremely hesitant, and part of me was extremely curious. And the curious side won out, because Dog Years is a memoir about Mark Doty's life and relationship with his dogs that he has known as an adult. He got the first one when his partner was dying of complications from AIDS, and the dog sort of helped him through the grief of that. And I had kind of thought that would be more present in the book, but it may come up again later, because I'm only maybe 30 to 40% into the audio of it, which Mark Doty reads himself. And I love when, especially in nonfiction, when an author reads their own work, and he has a good voice for it. So, but it's about the dogs and his relationship with them. One of the dogs is gone, and that is difficult, because when he describes the later years when the dog he has lost was old, and how he saw other people looking at them, and they as a stranger would think that's a dying dog or an old dog, and to him this was just his companion. And I have experienced that with both Guinness and Jameson, the 2 dogs I've lost in the last few years, and also with my friend Leon last year. It's hard to accept things like that, and we're not going to get into it too much because I don't want to get upset and cry. But it's really interesting, and so far I have managed to get through it without crying or becoming upset, but I am allowing myself to take my time with it to make sure that that doesn't happen, which is why I haven't made more progress in this book. But Mark Doty continues to be a really beautiful writer. He has very interesting thoughts and observations about life and companionship and a relationship with dogs. I had never had a dog before we got Guinness, and I am a big convert to dogs. And yeah, we're not going to talk about it because I will get emotional. But anyway, it has been a good reading experience so far. I'm just taking my time to avoid getting emotionally smacked down by the book. Speaking of dogs, Teddy just walked into the room. Let's see. You want to say hi? Teddy, say hi. Oh, let me see if I can get him onto my lap. Okay, come here. Oh, he probably won't stay because Joel is starting to cook. But here's Teddy, who is delightful. So, what am I going to read next? Oh, here we go. I don't know is the real answer to that question. And part of that is because Blackwater Lightship was a great read, but it is also it is heavy and deals with a lot of heavy subject matter. And even though it didn't make me feel hopeless and distressed, part of me feels I need something that's going to provide a little more balance, maybe a little more humor, especially since, as it happens, the audio that I am listening to is also heavy and kind of an emotional landmine field of stuff. So part of me feels I might need something funny. And a lot of the books that I had been considering as options for what to read next are not light and funny. So I might have to rethink. But I had been thinking that I wanted to read A Bookshop of One's Own. This was also on my pile of possibilities. And this one might be the answer because I don't think it's a depressing book. It's about Jane Cholney starting a feminist bookshop in the UK, and it's a love letter to the Silver Moon Bookshop, the champion of women writers and feminist literature on London's Charing Cross Road. So this might be the answer to give me a bit of an escape from heavier subject matter, but I'm going to give myself a little time to sit with these books and decide what I want to read next. I did get Sleeping Children from the library. This is by Anthony Passarone and translated by Frank Wynne. I hadn't included it on my pile of possibilities for June because I didn't think I was going to get it in the month of June. And now, in one of those weird situations, the library book became available, and I think I'm the very first person to have the library book because I recommended that they purchase it in the first place. But also, I now have access to the audio of it. So now I don't have to decide if I want to do this in print or if I want to listen to it on audio. And it also, we're not going to get into the plot right now, but it is also a little bit heavy. So maybe that wouldn't be a good idea. Maybe the answer is Francine's Spectacular Crash and Burn by Renee Swindle, which I did not include in my pile of possibilities, but is a book that was given to me. I have an advanced reader's copy of it. And would maybe be a little more fun while dealing with some more serious subjects like the foster system. And yeah, so this might be the answer as well. So I have to decide again if I want to try to get an audio copy of this book or read it in print. And this might be the answer to give me a bit of a diversion as well. And then, of course, because Edmund White died, A Boy's Own Story feels like what should be my next book. But again, I feel like I need an emotional break, especially since I am still listening to Dog Years on audio. So I do want to read this, but that's why I say this might be something I don't end up getting to right next immediately, but would try to get to at some point later on in the month. So if you have a thought about which one you think I should try to get to next, or if you have another recommendation, let me know in the comment section down below. Obviously, I will have had to choose something by the time you leave your comment or leaned in a direction. But let me know, because maybe if I haven't gotten to that one, I'll try to fit it in. So I think that's everything for this week. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.